Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to Shutter Magazine this month. I'm Dustin Lucas, and today I'm going to be talking about how to make your mark with masking. Since the release of Lightroom Classic last October, there has been some pretty exciting changes. There's been some performance upgrades. There's been the faster preview generation, two big things for a lot of Lightroom users they've been happy about. Of course, there are many of you out there, like myself, in the develop mode, having the issue with the preview freezing as you're cycling between images. Waiting for that update to happen. I'm most up to date going into mid-December at the moment, waiting for that last update. And so, with that said, Lightroom Classic really starts to open up the editing capabilities. And what I mean by that is, as a Lightroom user, I've always used the Edit In feature to go to Photoshop or to go to a different plugin to do my masking. I'm having to rasterize my raw. It becomes a TIFF or a PSD file. I'm taking it into Photoshop, doing all my layers, bringing it back in, and it creates this edit file or a copy of my raw, and that's all great and been a pretty seamless workflow. But I want to keep things in Lightroom. I want to have my raw files. I want to work in the non-destructive environment that the Lightroom ecosystem allows me to do. Long story short, I want to be able to move fast. I want to be able to make intuitive masks and mask my images. But end of the day, I want to be able to sync images in the develop module between multiple images and move on and not have to worry about image to image to image dodging and burning. It's a headache. Many of you out there in doing dodging and burning, I don't know how you do it, just because it can be quick, but to go through 800 images and dodge and burn seems crazy. But you're going to have 40 to 50, maybe even 100 images you're going to put in the album, and you might want to do some dodging and burning, and you want to move fast in those sequences, in the getting ready, and those creative shots, and some of the outdoor scenes where the lighting isn't changing too much, but you can sync it across multiple images. I'm going to show you how to do that with this new feature in Lightroom called range masking. It allows you to mask and choose by color, and it also allows you to choose the range and luminance. What do those things mean? Well, that's what we're going to talk about here. But first, we need to start out with local adjustments, masking, and how to apply those in Lightroom today to get a foundation for getting to be able to use those range mask features. So let's jump into the develop module and get started on our first image. Now that we're in the develop module, we can start to determine what type of masking or local adjustment effects we want to apply to our images and what kind of feathering and brush work we want to do. So in an image like this, it's been retouched, but I want to tone down some of that background to bring our focus, keep the focus on the bride. So we have a few options here, right? Photoshop allows us to do some develop basic adjustments here to the entire image, and then we can actually use local adjustments to dodge out, or we can paint out some of those adjustments. Let me show you how we can do that. So in an image like this, if I wanted to take the background and I want to tweak it to, if I want to take it down, say 1.5 stops, I can type in -1.5 and it's going to darken my background, but it's going to darken the entire image, right? So what I want to do now is if I hit the K key, that can immediately opens me up into the adjustment brush. Now, this area here seems pretty minimal. If I'm painting on the bride, I can start to just paint out some of this effect. And the way that I have to do that is I actually have to choose the exposure to bring it back up to 1.5. So it's kind of a push-pull type of work. We darken the entire image by 1.5 stops. Now we're going to brighten specific localized areas of the image to sort of do a dodging and burning. So to do that, I'm going to just start clicking, and you see it's painting on a mask here. And I have a pretty wide feather going on, so it's not necessarily finding the edge of her, but it's going to have a nice little kind of softened edge. So I can hit the O key, and it's automatically going to remove that mask overlay. So as you'll notice here, we have a pin. This is our, if we move this pin, it starts to move our adjustment, right? So that's how we can locate this specific adjustment. If we hover over it, it's going to show our mask. I can hit the O key, it's going to show the mask. Okay, great. So looking at this image and kind of determining, darkening the background, brightening the foreground, this is just a real quick way to kind of use Lightroom and the same idea for dodging and burning. Now what we can do is we can start to edit this, and we can use the Option key to subtract some of our mask here. So we can use the minus key and go around the edges. Start to paint in some of those areas that we want to be a little bit darker. Now again, I can change my feathering by holding shift and using my bracket key. So much like in Photoshop, your bracket keys kind of control the size of my brush. Here I'm going to kind of take it out here. We can see it a little bit better. So I can change the size of my brush by doing the bracket left smaller, bracket right bigger, right? Same thing for feathering. I can hold shift, bracket left, smaller feathering, less feathering, more feathering, right? So I'm toggling those two bracket keys, which is really great. So in coming in here, I can get a little bit closer to her face and her skin, and maybe I want to bring up some of the hair, just a little bit there, and to make sure the arm doesn't get too dark, right? Spent a lot of time thinking about that in painting. Well, what's a quicker way to get my same is there a different adjustment tool that we could use? Well, I'm going to go ahead and remove this tool altogether. Let's go back to the develop module. My image needs to be reset. So I'm going to go ahead and choose my edit pen here, and I'm going to actually click on it and hit the delete key so it removes it, right? Just a quick tip when you're wanting to move it with multiple pins, you can click on it, hit the delete key, and that removes it. So we can jump into the radial filter, which is going to be Shift M. Now the radial filter is going to allow us to click and drag over an area. It's kind of like an oval. It's a little weird getting used to, but you can choose the center of your subject and expand, right? So we can grab this tool and kind of focus on her face. And so if we want it to go longer, sure, great. But what about our arm, right? So we're missing all this area here. Not the most efficient tool, but not to worry. If we need to add this tool, we can use Command plus T, and that allows us to use an adjustment brush to paint in some of the other areas as well. So hotkeys, of course, as we were learning, are going to be super helpful here. But as this edit brush you're finding, we could have done the same thing with just the adjustment brush. But just kind of want to show you, if you're using a radial tool, you can add in, as well as once you have the brush feature, you can choose Shift T, and that can allow you to now edit the actual adjustment brush. If you want to darken it a little bit, you certainly can. You can hit Command T, that takes you back to the edit adjustment brush, and we can toggle option to remove some of it. So if we're brightening the arm here and the neck and the hair, and we decide that we get a little too hot in these areas, we can hold the option key and remove some of it. Pretty simple. So again, if we want to add a new new radial filter altogether, we can do that just for the eye. I think that's going to be a little over the top, but if you want to use a radial filter and brighten up the eye, right, you can go. There's multiple ways to use this tool. Not necessarily what's showing. Turn that off so that way we can actually see the image. So just real quick, just showing the radial filter. Pretty simple stuff. Moving into an image that would allow us to use the graduated filter starts to become a more interesting option. So in an image like this, we can start to apply a different adjustment tool, and that's going to be the graduated filter. It's going to be something where we're actually dragging. I'm going to hit the M key and open this up. So for instance, if I wanted to take all these highlights and I wanted to increase this intensity and kind of mimic this same look, I can actually click here, hold shift so it keeps my vertical, and what it's actually going to do is we can intensify this light here. So if we really wanted to push that exposure and for whatever reason really intensify this light going on here, it's a really interesting way to do that. It's just going to affect those highlights. Quite the contrary, if we wanted to kill the highlights in just that particular area, which of course they're only showing up here, we can do that and toggle this on and off. Now if I remove this so that way we can actually see the tool and what it's doing, our mask overlay, the O key, it's going to drag it from here all the way over. So if you were wanting to only affect particular parts of the images, you definitely need to remember wherever we're dragging from, it's not necessarily only going to stop at this window. So with this graduated tool, of course, we're affecting this entire area here, and it's going to be greater value, and then it's going to gradually fall off towards the subject here. So if we want to, again, I'm going to hit the O key. If we want to increase the black point, and it's a little too much, or we want to get a little more dramatic, right? We can darken those areas without losing light over here. And what's interesting about this is if I take this down, stop and a half, to really kind of give it some drama and a little bit of highlight recovery, I can now add a new graduated filter over here. And I don't necessarily want to increase it by a full stop, but you can kind of show, if you want to bring some of that separation light in just on the edge of him, kind of gives you a nice option to go from our image here, which is pretty in your face and pretty punchy, and we can kind of level the image out with a little bit of separation light back here. We can darken this wall some more. I think we went a little heavy on the highlight recovery. Not to worry, if we want to go back to, and of course we can choose to show our pins when we're hovering over. If we want to choose this pin, we can double click on the highlight recovery and get rid of it, right? So again, we can take our image, a lot of punch here, a lot of window light. We can kind of even out the lighting a little bit there. Something just interesting to do as well. Jumping into the auto mask feature, now we can start to mask out our subject without having to worry about those edges, and that's where we can go next. Now we can look at the graduated filter in a scenario where it's going to be pretty common, right? Skies. Adding blue to the sky, darkening the sky, that's just a common usage for the graduated filter. And I wanted to show an image like this where we can incorporate the graduated filter as well as the edit brush with the auto feature. So we can click the M key and automatically go into our graduated filter menu. Now, I've already created an effect preset, which you can do by storing and saving your current settings whenever you make all of your tweaks here in the adjustment panel. But I've created one just called Color Blue Skies. And so that way when I actually paint it over my blue sky, it just brings back some of that drama and some of that saturation. Now as you're noticing, automatically with my graduated filter is it's going to darken the building. Well, that's common. It doesn't really find that edge. It doesn't automatically mask that out. Again, we'll get to range masking where it comes into full effect here without this second treatment with the edit brush. Now we can hold shift and hit T, and that takes us to our brush tool. Now you'll notice there's an auto mask option whenever you're using the adjustment brush or the edit brush in this case. If we choose the auto mask, we can actually choose to auto mask out our building here. So if I'm clicking over the building and I'm actually choosing to mask this out, it will try and find the edge of this building as best as it can. And I'm just going to paint all the way down here and make sure that we've gotten this mask removed. Now if I hit the O key, right, it's kind of hard to tell where my mask starts, where my mask ends. Is it still darkening the building? Well, we do have some options here. The adjustment mask overlay, you can choose under the tool menu bar, you can choose a different color. It might help to do black. In this case, well, it didn't really help out. Might help to do green just to show where the difference in the green is. That kind of helps out. It just shows a masked edge, but at least it's off of our building. So if I want to hold the option key and I want to shrink my brush, you can change the feathering, holding a lot of keys here. If I really want to get to that edge and I just want to paint over the building, it's going to try and find those edges as best as it can. Showing where my green is. The auto mask does a pretty good job. So as you see my building start to take back its color, you can see those differences. And if I choose one of these poles, let's see if it actually does a good job or not. The auto mask tool it's tough. When you have hard edges, it does a pretty good job. But then again, um, you have to have a hard edge. Architecture works really well. But this does a pretty decent job for allowing me to mask out my subject. So I've kind of done this in 2 steps, right? I've had to do a graduated filter, and then I had to do an edit brush to get rid of it. Well, we could have, let's just turn this off, just hit the K key, had our auto mask feature turned on. We already have our effects preset selected. So I'm just going to go in and I'm going to paint this sky without even thinking about the building, other than I'm just painting my sky. Well, that did a pretty good job for the most part, just doing it in one fell swoop. So showing you really quick just kind of the accuracy of this tool, being able to really, I think we went a little crazy on our sky, don't get me wrong, it's a little too dramatic, but you can see as we can start to make some tweaks back to our image, you can kind of tweak this back to your specific settings, but like temperature and saturation, right, you can really increase and dramatize the blues, which I like to do in an image like this, but pretty quick works for the sky and something like that. Again, I can't necessarily sync this image to image because unless my camera's on a tripod and I'm not moving anything, right, doing still photography, I can't really sync this to multiple images. As a wedding photographer, you're shooting portraiture, your camera's in your hand, you're tweaking, you're moving, even small adjustments, your mask is going to have to be made per image. And that's exactly where range masking comes in to really help out with that scenario. So let's jump in to range masking and edit this image again. Now that we looked at a couple tools for applying this to one image, how is this going to reflect for multiple images in a sequence, right? Lightroom, we want to be able to sync images, we want to be able to move and move on. So what I'm going to do is show you with the graduated filter, along with our edit brush that we added in to mask out the building, so only the sky is getting this blue sky treatment that we created with our effects preset here. So I'm going to turn my mask overlay on. I'm going to hold shift and click the last image in the same sequence. As you can see in these images, the building moves. So the sky isn't in the same place. There's adjustments that need to be made image to image. So if I do a quick sync, and I'm going to sync all my adjustments from the fully edited image with my masking, I've chosen to keep local adjustments, which I'm sure you read or see all the time, to uncheck this whenever you're editing, which is a good idea if you're not working in the same sequence or just for this. For these practices, I just want to show you, you're going to have local adjustments selected, and all of those, we're going to hit synchronize. So it's going to take each one of our images. As I hold command, I can stay in the graduated filter module, tool module, and I can arrow to the right to go to each image. And as you're going to see, my mask isn't perfect. You're seeing where the green, where it's applying the effect, and white, or showing the image, the actual image colors, where it's missing. Now, turning off our mask overlay, it looks really obvious and terrible. So as you can see with the graduated filter, we don't have the flexibility in just syncing that and moving on. Quite the contrary, we actually have the ability, I'm going to go ahead and reset those two images. We have a little more flexibility when you're using the auto feature, the auto mask feature for the adjustment brush. I'm going to go ahead and reset both of those images. And I can actually choose to bring back my adjustment we made earlier where the graduated filter was removed and we're working specifically with our adjustment brush. So if I hit the K key, that will take me back into that. I'm just going to darken this a little bit more just to make sure to show you that we have this effect being applied. And we can even lower the blue in the sky. Of course, as you notice, I'm clicking on there, right? Nothing's happening in the image. So we have to click on our actual pen, something to remember that obviously even I forgot. We can lower those adjustments to really bring some intensity in the sky, maybe even a little more clarity. Again, just kind of pushing this image a little far, just for practice purposes. So let's just keep that here. We don't need to overcomplicate this. Now we want to sync this adjustment to my other images in the sequence. Well, as you saw with the graduated filter, it was a fail. So I'm going to select those images. I'm going to hit sync by Shift Command S, or of course you have your sync button here. I'm going to make sure local adjustments is chosen, and we're just going to see how those adjustments translate. So I'm going to hit the O key so that way my mask comes back, and I'm going to hold Command, arrow to the right. Wow, that actually did a pretty decent job. I'm not seeing any obvious missing parts of my mask. Same thing with my last image. Now just to make sure, because I'm just seeing a little bit of loss here on the right edge, I'm going to click the O key to get rid of my mask overlay, excuse me, and just kind of going through these 3 images, and it did a pretty decent job with the sync. It's not perfect, but it does a really decent job with just the auto mask feature. So that's one step into efficiency with masking. Now let's move into some other more problematic images where you're not going to have as easy of a time in syncing images when we start to auto mask subjects. All right, so I want to jump into a scenario where you want to remove the cast of color or a certain color cast out of the main subject's clothing only. So in this image here, I'm going to remove some of that blue cast that's going on to the groom's suit due to the sky and it reflecting off of the salt flats. I just want to kind of get that suit a little more neutral and a little natural looking. So my first instinct is to go to the HSL panel, use my target adjustment tool, click on the suit and drag down to remove the saturation. Well, as you can see, the majority of the cast that's in the suit is blue, which is what's in the sky, which is what's in the salt flats. Problem with that is I like my intense blue sky, but I want to have a neutral looking suit. So I'm going to automatically have to use my local adjustment brushes in order to remove the saturation out of the blue on the actual suit. So to do that, I can hit my K key and go immediately into my adjustment brush. Well, I've created an effect preset so I can quickly dial in this no blue suit. It's going to drop the saturation, do some things with the shadows and the contrast. Again, it's just a quick preset I put together just to remove this issue going on. So if I zoom in to where I have a full image of the suit itself, what I can start to do is make sure my mask is chosen. I want to make sure my feathering is rather small, and I'm just going to paint right at the edge of the suit. And when doing this, you can choose to keep your mask overlay turned on, just so you can see that it's doing a pretty damn good job, even though I'm not exactly painting over the clothing itself, but I'm just kind of choosing a quick edge touch here, and so I don't have to worry about masking out the sky as much. It'll do a pretty good job of masking out the majority of this. The problem is it's not going to do well with the hands, as well as there's going to be some spots of the suit here that it's not actually going to remove, so then I have to kind of go in with the auto mask turned off. Again, it's not perfect, but it does a pretty quick job to getting this cast removed out of the suit. So as you can see how long I'm taking on one image, this isn't very efficient, especially not for what Lightroom can do. But just kind of breaking this down to one image, I already have my preset put together, and so it's automatically taking that cast of blue, which you're seeing here. It seems a little more obvious once we turn my adjustment brush back on. We have that cast gone. So that's kind of how auto mask is going to work with hard edges, especially with the small subject matter here, but to separate them from the background, just to remove some of those cast out, becomes very helpful when just isolating, removing that cast from the suit. Now that we took time to paint the mask specifically for this image, that doesn't really help me when I want to sync multiple images in a sequence and I want to move. That's what I do in Lightroom. I edit, sync, move. Batch processing is a very helpful tool to get through hundreds of images in under an hour when I don't need to spend that amount of time getting them to proof level. Well, I want to get this image a little beyond proof level, but I still want to have that level of efficiency going sync, 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 and moving through my catalog. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce range masking, which is something that the Lightroom Classic newest version allows you to do. It allows you to choose a mask and it bases it on color, and then another option is to choose the range of luminance. Let's talk about color first and foremost. In order for us to get range masking to work, we actually have to convert. You'll notice our mask range is turned off here. We have to convert all of our files to version 4. Well, What does that mean? Well, version 4 is listed in camera calibration in the develop module. So right now we're automatically in version 3, being that we've opened this catalog from Lightroom CC 2015 or Lightroom 6, and we've updated it to Lightroom Classic. Well, it kept all of those files in version 3, the 2012 process, the one we're used to. Well, there's a current version 4, which doesn't change that 2012 color process, but it allows you to take more advantage of the capabilities in Lightroom Classic. All right, well, what is it going to allow us to do? So if I click on the lightning bolt here, it allows me to update all of my film strip photos at once. Definitely much faster, no reason to just do one photo. Again, it's not going to cause any detrimental damage or decrease in quality, or even make your image look a lot sharper. It just changes the version in order for you to take advantage of the range masking. So what we want to do is we want to look at specifically the adjustment brush, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this past mask that we created. I'm going to throw it away. What I want to do is I'm going to paint a rather large mask over top of my entire subject. Now, whether you have auto mask turned on or not doesn't really matter. I'm going to keep it unchecked just so that way you can see how big of the mask that I'm painting here. So I'm painting over top of my subject, which just seems kind of crazy, right? We're going to have this giant halo going on, which is a major no-no in the retouching world. Halos are bad. So if I click on range mask off and I choose color, what I can do is then hit the O key to remove, so that way we can see outside of our mask. You can see how it's desaturating our entire image here all around him. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to choose this dropper tool, and I'm going to choose just the suit itself. And immediately the background and the sky is removed from that selection. Zooming in here a little bit more, I'm going to turn my mask back on, and it literally is mostly choosing, and it does a pretty good job of only choosing the suit and some of this background here. So if I take a step back here, we go from our giant sort of glowing green mask, and I'm keeping that mask color on just so it's very apparent where it's masking and where it's not. And then you see when I chose the suit, it chose that specific color and looked for that color in all the other areas of my mask. Well, why did I choose a larger mask? I'll show you in a second, so that way we can sync multiple images. But if I want to start to remove these other areas that aren't really involved, what I can do is I can change my amount slider, and I can start to move it to the left. Now if I move it really far, it's going to kill almost every aspect except the suit. Well, I don't want the suit to start losing its cast, and I don't really mind that the mountain range back here that has the same cast of blue, it's going to remove some of that as well. There's going to be some areas of this image I want to be particularly careful about, but realistically, as long as it's mostly off his face, and even if it has a cast of blue in the face, I'm perfectly okay with that. What we can also do to kind of give us a little more options here is I can actually click and drag, which will help give us a little better of a range in color. Something if we're wanting to, try and get this green removed from his face, we'd really have to drop the amount down, which is fine. I think that if we lower that amount, I'm okay sacrificing some of the crevices in the suit to get rid of. So what we can do is now look at our image and see how good of a job it did as a whole, turning this on and off. And that's pretty good. I mean, considering it's got a little bit of the mountain here that it's getting rid of, but so subtle, if I didn't bring it up, it's probably not even something you would notice. But real quickly, just seeing the power and the effect of the range mask color, that's basically it. You choose the colors that you're looking for it to keep in the mask, and then you can choose the range in which, sort of like feathering, or actually the range and the amount of color and the colors that sort of fall outside of that range that you chose, it gives you pretty quick results in removing from the suit. Same thing goes. Let's jump over to a graduated filter and do something with the sky. So I'm going to go and actually click and drag into my sky here. I'm going to get rid of these previous ones that I've built and just kind of show you the power. So this is what my sky looks like initially. Of course, it's running the no blue suit. So if I click over here on color skies, it's going to make my sky a little heavy, a little intense. But for purposes of this, I just want to show you the power of range mask color. So I'm going to go ahead and choose range mask color again, so that way you can see where my mask is now. And if I choose my dropper tool and I go at the very top here and I just kind of drag down, let's just drag down to there. It immediately removes our subject. I mean, the masks are quite powerful in the with the range mask tool. And so what I can do is, you're noticing my mountains turned green. Well, it's removing some of the blue out of the mountains, where it's going to intensify them. So I can drag this over to where the mountains go away, and I still have a pretty decent greenish looking sky here. But taking it down to about 20, I think is going to be beneficial to where I still get the majority of my sky, and it's not affecting my whole image. So you can see this kind of haloing effect going on here. I think that's going to be from the effect that I'm using. I think we can turn off the clarity as well as the highlights. We don't have to go as heavy on the highlights there. Come off the effect there. It doesn't need to be as heavy, but quite quickly you can show that difference. And so we can lower this effect a little bit more as well, if that's going to help some of this ridge line here. That's the only part that kind of bothers me. I can always lift this up to remove some of that effect so it's not coming down as far, which might help out as well. But going back to the blue skies, just real quick showing you that power with the mask and it just automatically removing it. So if I drag it down further, it's still removing it specifically from affecting the subject here. So with that said, I mean, there's a lot of capabilities with the range mask color tool. Let's jump into a scenario where you can use the luminance and how that's going to work. So now that we're moving on to range mask luminance, we can start to look at how we can get more benefits and a more exact mask using the luminance as our range for choosing where our adjustment's going to lie. So I've created a effects preset called the color no blue ground. So it's just one to desaturate the ground. I'm also going to kind of brighten it up. I want the salt flats to be a little more desaturated and a little more neutral. So what I'm going to do is I'm naturally going to gravitate to using my graduated filter, and I'm just going to hold shift, click at a little bit outside of my image, and I'm going to click and drag up. And I just kind of want to take this to where the middle of my gradient is right at the edge of the white. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my mask overlay on to show you it's kind of fading up to the mountains and into the sky here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose range mask luminance. So you have two options here. You have a range. Left side is going to be dark values. Right side is going to be light values. Also, you're going to have this smoothness tool that's going to start to smooth out some of those edges or the luminance range. It's going to allow you a little more flexibility in your range above here. So let me just show you how this works. So if I want to remove him and the mountains, which they kind of fall into similar tonal ranges are specifically, they're just darker tones. If I drag in from the right, you'll slowly start to see the green is removed from them. And remember, anything that the green mask is on is where our effect is going to occur. So if I go all the way up to 50, you are seeing that mask almost disappear completely from his pants, as well as our horizon line here, or the mountain line. Well, if I take smoothness down, you can see it removes even more of the background. And if I take it up, it starts to add it in. So what I like to do is take the smoothness, down to like 25. Because what that's going to allow me to do is I can lower my dark range to allow some of those tones to come back in that I might want to have a little bit more cohesive of a gradient balance here at this edge, but I'm still able to mask him out, which is pretty nice. So in doing that, I can start to lower this smoothness down further to make sure we're removing it from the sky here. It looks like the sky is getting some of that value as well, which if I lower my brightness, seems I'm still getting some of that. Right? See what we did there? So I can get rid of the sky, but we're starting to lose the edge here. So it's going to be a push and pull between this value here in the lower left-hand corner and making sure we're not keeping the sky. Again, I wanted to lift my mask. If I lower this, I want to make sure we're covering and not losing any of just from the natural gradient here. So it might be a better idea to take this down a little bit further, and then we can start to bring our range back over from the left to where we have our areas in the corners masked back in, but we lost the sky. I think the sky for the most part is completely gone. I'm not worried about these being 100% perfect. Again, these are approximations, so I mean for this image it's a little bit easier of an masking option here. Just kind of working with, you can always kind of lower your graduated filter range too if some of these tones, some of these luminance values overlap. Again, if I turn this off, turn off my mask overlay, you can see the change in the sky and the ground help out quite a bit. My sky might be a little bit heavy still. Again, I can always kind of take that, come off the exposure a little bit there. But it's kind of a nice change between my image here, which is a little more dull and desaturated, just to bring back a little color. Now you're probably wondering, okay, that's great. Again, you did it for one image. How can we sync it to multiple images? Well, I'll show you. So we can go into our library mode and we can sync. I'm going to go ahead and reset these images just to show you how these can kind of work in their advantage. Now I understand the subjects are kind of in the same position, they're in a similar position, but again, our in looking at the sky and ground, we should be able to sync even though our sky to ground ratio changes in all three of these images. We should be able to just sync these images in all of our corrections. Now again, there may be some adjustments we need to make between these, but I can show you. And don't worry about the banding so much. It's something that I was worried about with my mask. When I zoom in to 1:1 and Lightroom loads the 1:1 preview, all that banding kind of goes away. So it's not something you need to worry about. Just kind of wanted to bring that to your attention. It wasn't something that I was pulling the image apart. It's holding command, I can go to the right, and you'll see that my pins are exactly the same in these images. Now, again, the exposure here, and if we're looking specifically at matching these two images more closely for exposure, they didn't necessarily need to be reset and ran, but I just kind of wanted to show you real quick. They got darker because their exposures were reset. So just kind of going back through these now that the exposures are a little bit closer. Again, it was just a real quick change. We can look at our range mask and see how good of a job it did. So I'm going to hit my O key. I'm going to hit M to go to the graduated filter. I'm going to hit my O key to show my masks. I'm going to see if it'll let me hold both. Well, it won't, of course. We can just do them one at a time. So we can show my sky. Did a pretty good job. Hold Command, go to the next image. And again, you can make some tweaks here, but I'm okay with some of the mountains here getting a little bit of my mask, as it did here, right? So our mask in both of these certainly got both. And you'll see if you click on the other pen, it'll go to Luminance, and we can see how well our mask did for the ground. So we can hold Command, go to the next image. It's showing up a little bit in the dress. Again, this is something where we can start to reduce some of those tones, but then also kind of work with smoothness to get rid of the dress. Difficulty is, right, we're going to have some tones that kind of overlap here, and I don't know if it's necessarily that big of a deal that we're removing some of the dress, as well as using the color mask. This is probably something that we'll notice some overlap with the dress as well. Nothing really detrimental where it really shifted her. If anything, it probably brightened up the dress a little bit there. That's something where we can go in and make, fine-tune adjustments if we need to. We can go to Shift T, go to our brush tool, hold Option, and we can quite quickly paint that out. That's a quick adjustment, right? We're noticing that it took care of the dress. It's not perfect, but it is a quick adjustment. We can go to the next image where they're going to be standing together. Looking at where it did our mask, turning the O key on. Again, not perfect. We can make first adjustments with our smoothness tool. I'm going to kind of pull up some of the smoothness to see if I can fix. Again, now we're getting some of the suit back in. I don't necessarily want to do that. Bringing our range over from the left definitely helps with the dress, but again, we're losing our ground to sky, so it's something that might benefit more from using the erase brush. So if we hold Option, we can go in and just paint out the dress. Again, this is going to happen. This is a real world scenario. The mask isn't perfect. There's going to be, it's an all or nothing, right? It's not going to choose just the subjects here, but this is all based from my these are all based from the one sample where I'm going image to image between these. Oh, looks like I unselected one of my images. Well, you can always do the Command Z. I undid my flag between these images. So real quick, just kind of recap what we had done. Kind of zoom out here. So if I hit my M key, want to reiterate, wouldn't worry about the banding because it's not really in the image from like poor image quality. It disappears once it regenerates the preview. I'm just kind of showing you where our masks show up and how you can kind of sync between multiple images. What I also like is the ability to do it within, my computer's huffing and puffing here. What I also like the ability to do is take an image from like a sequence like this And I can start to sync multiple images as well. So we can go in, zoom out here, choosing the different tools. We can start to, maybe we want to remove some of this blue in the foreground here. How do we do that? I'm going to say the quickest way for us to do that is a graduated filter. Kind of just works with the image naturally. So I'm going to hit my M key. As you can tell, I really like the graduated filter tool. It works quite well. Now we don't want it to go to our kind of bluish water back here, but maybe we want to. It's okay to desaturate some of that as well. As you can see, go right up to the mountains. We'll stop it right there. We'll choose our range mask. I think if we do luminance, that's going to be a better option than if we choose color, right? There's a lot of blue in here. It's going to choose a lot of parts of the image. So if we start to drag away brighter to darker, that's going to make more sense, right? This is one of those opposite scenarios. It wouldn't really make sense for us to drag away the dark because the foreground's dark. So it's definitely something to think about, kind of a little bit different where we're getting rid of some of those brighter tones that are in the foreground to there. Now we can lower our smoothness to kind of blend that area. As you see, it started bringing up our, I'm going to take it back. It started blending this a little bit to make it a little more even, a little more natural. We can turn that off. And I have no blue ground here just to kind of show the before and after. Again, if I want to intensify this, I can definitely take my warmth up to 20 if I want to, and I want to brighten the foreground too much. I don't think that's going to look too good. But just kind of removing some of that saturation, take it down to -25. It's just a real quick way to get rid of kind of that dark blue ground, just kind of neutralize a little bit, kind of matches the mountains in the background. It's kind of the same area. This kind of, now we kind of have this water looking area back here, which we know is the salt flats from before. So if we want to quickly just kind of drag up our area, here the difficulty now with how do we keep both of these tones? Well, we would have to come off of our so you can see the shift in this. It's easier with the mask turned on, but you can see how the dress is getting pretty beat up. We drag from the right, our dress goes away, as well as some of that blue tone in the background. I think our best option here is going to be to just mess with the foreground. We can always paint in, again, Shift T, we can always paint to this in if we just want to keep that in and not the dress. Pretty simple to do, just requires a little finessing. Auto mask would work out pretty well there to keep the edges of her, but again, we can have that a little less contrasty, a little less blue. Just kind of works out really well. So now that we're done, we can go back to our main catalog of images and we can kind of sync in this entire scene here. Now, some of these other images in here are unedited, so I'm going to leave those ones alone, but kind of show you where our range can really start to. I'm going to check none, and I'm just going to choose local adjustments. I'm going to hit synchronize. We can kind of see these update. Of course, they're slowly moving. They're all kind of opening up and getting darker. Some of them have, I think some of these files in here were JPEGs, which we want to exclude altogether. Those aren't going to really translate correctly. But just kind of wanted to show you a quick sync. It's not perfect, but it took our sequence of images, kind of matched the foreground here. I'm going to go through them in the graduated filter. Choose this pin just to show you real quick, turning our mask on. Again, because we did that custom painting, that's where we kind of get a little, it's going to start to get a little squirrely here. It start to look rather terrible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my trusty go back. And this is a real scenario, right? So I made a decision to paint in that specific area, and I'm going to undo that. So let's go back to our image, develop module, M key to go back to the graduated filter, and I am going to paint out show our history, make it a little bit quicker. So I want to go back to kind of removing some of that background. Make it a little more subtle of an adjustment here. So again, our exposure went up, dropping the desaturation. All right, let's try this again. So we have all of our images selected. Just going to kind of choose a random range of images by, let's just see how these pan out. I want to make sure I don't have any of my JPEGs selected. Those ones aren't going to work out as well, but these are all pretty similar images. We can go back to these as well and just sync our local adjustments and see how close it's going to get us from a syncing perspective. So all of our images are changing. I'm going to go back into develop module, hit my M key, and I can hold command as I go through each of these, clicking the pen, clicking the O key. We can go through and see how each of these match. Now, I don't necessarily need to keep my pen visible, so it gets kind of annoying here. So I'm just going to go through image to image and kind of show you how decent of a job it's doing, even though there's a change, right? Here's our first problem. So if I go to the M key, let's take a look at what's going on here. Because I don't think this translated. If I choose, and as we can see, in this case we need to make a small adjustment. And because this is quite a bit darker, I'm going to show you, still needs a little bit of an adjustment. But again, we can make that small adjustment to the image, remove even more of the blue if we want. Take a little time with the image, finesse it, remove some more of the saturation. Again, it's going from a pretty decent blue cast to something, a little closer to here, maybe even add some black point back in to kind of give it a little more depth. Somewhere around in there. Down to -35. I think that's about as far as I want to go. I also think that if we increase our temperature on the image, I think we can help out some of that area as well. That's going to be a little bit of a help. Drop the highlights down. All normal process with editing, and I think we'll be a little bit closer to these images, which I agree. So all of these ones kind of need that same adjustment. So I'm going to kind of go back through and choose them, sync them, choose my white balance, my highlights, and my local adjustments. Those are the main things that I adjusted. And done. All right, so I get those quick adjustments. I'm not seeing a major halo around her because of the mask moving, but it's worth checking out just to make sure that we don't have any Let me turn that back on. Make sure that we don't have any ghosting effects going on. But again, this is a real world workflow, right? I'm syncing images, I'm masking. I mean, it's pretty incredible. The auto mask we saw earlier works sort of. This is something where I can do my graduated filter, I'm choosing luminance, and now if it's similar sequences of images, I don't even have to think about it anymore. I'm just going image to image, and again, this is a scenario where, right, comparing these two images, I'm going to want to take these adjustments and bring them over here. Maybe I can, right? There's no harm in syncing them. Except I sync from the wrong image. That's a rookie mistake there. So we want to make sure we're syncing from our goal image here. And I'm going across. Did a pretty decent job. This is where we were. Just adding those little bit of effects makes it a little more cohesive. Again, we can click on this image, click on those, and then click off. Just some simple adjustments to get the images a little bit closer. Again, that's a little bit of an exposure issue going on there. Not a major jump. Maybe I can darken these images up. So just to show you where we started out, I mean, there's a lot of capabilities with range mask and color mask, but it's it's definitely a good start. Now, end of the day, this isn't going to shave off hours of post-production for those of you who choose to dodge and burn and locally adjust 800 images of a wedding. But what Lightroom is going to allow you to do is it's going to allow you some of that efficiency of syncing images using these range masks, the color and the luminance, to sync sequences of images. So it might be a little more beneficial for you in your creative shots or in sequences, maybe for your 100 images for an album. But end of day, it's definitely the beginning for masking and a much more intuitive masking process for Lightroom. So definitely take some time. Like with most things in Lightroom, it's a slow process, but the workflow and dedicating some time to getting used to how you can use them for your advantages in your workflow, like I kind of showed you, syncing images blindly and saying, hey, I'm all done. You definitely got to go back and check. You're going to have images that are off. You got to make some subtle adjustments. It's going to be some balance between the develop module with your slider, basic panel adjustments, exposure, and wipeouts can sometimes make a lot less work for you on the local adjustment side when you're painting masks. Again, get used to hotkeys. That makes things a lot faster as well. The effects presets that I created, you're more than happy to copy and tweak. There are plenty of ones you can buy out there, effects presets, or just make your own for just quicker ways to enhance your images. But again, it's just the beginning for masking. In order to make your mark in Lightroom and really start to bring some of that creativity in with masking, I definitely advise learning the range masking techniques and just taking some time with them, and definitely reach out if you guys have any questions. Stay tuned for more articles as Lightroom Classic rolls out some more upgrades and some other software that incorporates the masking features.